There are rules, unwritten rules. You play 1 at home, 2 on the road, and 3 if you lose them.
In the middle of the struggle for civil and political rights for African Americans in the United States, Texas Western College upset perennial powerhouse, the University of Kentucky, in the 1966 basketball championship game. This historical game is one of the main reasons college basketball teams in the South started recruiting black players in the late 1960s. Neither the 14,523 people in attendance at Maryland's Cole Fieldhouse nor the millions of people tuned in on their TVs and radios across the country knew the significance of this game at the time, a game that would become one of the most important sporting events in the social justice movement. Texas Western's coach Don Haskins started 5 black players and then went on to play only 7 of his players, all of them being black, against Adolph Rupp's all-white Kentucky team. The racial tensions in the South and across the country made this game a historic event. On March 19, 1966, 5 African American players from Texas Western, led by Coach Don Haskins, stepped onto the court to play the all-white Kentucky team for the NCAA Division I championship. This was the first time in history that 5 African Americans started in a major college game. After their win, within 2 years, every top college in the South had an African American player on their roster. Don Haskins' stand in history resulted in a wave that led to integration in college sports, making it possible for players to play regardless of their skin color in today's world. In the 1960s, segregation was a huge problem in the United States. It resulted in deep cultural divides. During this time, civil rights groups rose up to advocate for African American rights. They led countless protests, demonstrations, and marches, including the 1955 Montgomery bus boycott, protesting the rule that blacks were required to give up their seats for white people. This was among the first civil rights protests to gain support in the public eye. An important civil rights leader was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who supported the boycott and in August of 1963 led the March on Washington to call attention to the needs and rights of African Americans. Both men and women and people of all races and religions attended the march, which was 200,000 people strong. President John F. Kennedy was worried by the actions of Dr. King and the riots it would create, resulting in him starting to draft the civil rights legislation. Sadly, 3 months after the march, JFK was assassinated, leaving the bill unfinished. JFK's successor, Lyndon Johnson, finished and passed the bill after coming into office, which made discrimination against African Americans in public settings illegal. In the 1960s, college athletics in the North had just started integrating their athletic programs, while conferences in the South and East had virtually no black players on their rosters. The Midwestern Conference, also known as the Big Ten, had been integrated since the 1890s. They had black players on their rosters, but bowing to social pressures, they would often sit or even leave their black players at home when they went to the South to play. The first collegiate African American player was George Jewett, who played on the University of Michigan's football team in 1890. Many other African American athletes followed in his footsteps, but for years to come they played limited roles. One of the first colleges in the South to start integrating their student body was Texas Western College, or TWC, located in the small town of El Paso. In 1955, TWC integrated their school, and by the next year, they had signed their first African American players, Cecil and Charlie Brown. Former Texas Western coach Don Haskins wrote in his book Glory Road,
"Back then, all the teams from the Atlantic Coast Conference to the Southeastern Conference to the Southwest Conference had only white players."
While many coaches in the 50s and 60s were running all-white programs, a large percentage of Don Haskins' recruits were black. One reason coaches did not recruit blacks was due to the belief that they were not intelligent enough and would not be able to stand the pressures of playing at such a high level. Don Haskins was undeterred by race because growing up he had a close friend named Herman Carr who was black, and due to the color of his skin, he didn't get any offers from colleges, while Haskins did because he was white.
In an unprecedented move, Coach Haskins is starting 5 Negro players.
That's like a spit in the face to
A
us.
first in NCAA championship history.
On March 19, 1966, Texas Western played the University of Kentucky in the NCAA College Basketball National Championship game. Texas Western had a 12-man roster, with 7 blacks, 4 whites, and 1 Latino player. Don Haskins took a stand by starting and only playing his 7 African Americans against the all-white Kentucky team. Don Haskins wrote,
"At the time, most teams in the South didn't have a single black player, but it wasn't uncommon for a school in the North or West to start 3 or occasionally 4 black players, but never, at least according to anyone's knowledge, did a team anywhere in the country start 5 black players."
Haskins also later said that he played his best players in order to win, but playing those players sent a clear underlying message. There is no difference between races. White or black, they are still just a player. Like Haskins, his team was not deterred by race. An example of the team working together without regard to race occurred when Neville Shedd, a black player, resorted to physically punch a player from the opposing team in defense of his white teammate. By winning the national championship, Texas Western helped open up the conversation of African Americans in college athletics. Sports writer Gary Nunn said,
Texas Western versus Kentucky game was the watershed game in college history, the opening of eyes and the opening of doors.
Texas Western's victory opened many eyes to what was going on in the world of college athletics in the South, and changed the discriminatory views of many people and coaches. Haskins wrote,
"It broke the color barrier because the pressure on the Southern schools that discriminated against black athletes was too great for them to continue to field segregated teams."
In the next few years, coaches started to recruit players based on their talent, not skin color, and colleges started admitting more black students. One of the most significant signs of change was when Kentucky coach Adolph Rupp, notoriously known for his recruitment of strictly white players, recruited Kentucky's first black player, Tom Paine, in 1969. Eddie Mullins, the publicity director at Texas Western, said,
"If there was a color barrier, that game broke it down."
"This game not only meant a lot to the small town of El Paso, but it was life-changing for millions of black athletes." Haskins said,
"The positive impact of the game came through increased opportunity for black players. Before we beat Kentucky, there was not a single black player or football player in the Southeast, Southwest, or Atlantic Coast Conference. Not one. A couple of months after we won, Vanderbilt of the SEC recruited the first black player and the floodgates opened. I remember looking at the sports page in the early 1970s, and I had pictures of the All-Southwest Conference team. All 5 of them were black. It was that quick. Within 5-6 years, everyone was recruiting black players because if they didn't, they wouldn't be able to field a competitive team."
This game still has a strong significance today, as most of the players in the National Football League and National Basketball Association are black. According to racial equality activist Richard Lapchick,
in 2015, the NBA was composed of 74.4% black players and 23.3% white players.
And according to Vice News,
African American males are only 6% of the United States population, but comprise nearly 70% of the players in the NFL.
This game opened doors for African American athletes to play college sports and to get an education they likely would have not otherwise received. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics in 2011, 69% of African Americans in high school graduated, while in the 1960s, only 23% of black high school students graduated. In addition, college graduation rates have also jumped for African American students since the 60s. In 1960, only 3.1% of black students graduated from college, compared to 2011, where the graduation rate recorded for black college students was 42%. Although not everyone has heard of the Texas Western Miners or know about the part they played in integrating college sports, their legacy lives on in millions of players across the United States. Haskins wrote,
"All I had done is exactly what a coach is supposed to do. I started my 5 best players in an effort to maximize the chances of winning the game. To me, they were just kids in white and orange uniforms. Not white guys, not black guys, just minors."